Welcome to The Details with Elliott, Connie, and Adam Frower. This is a podcast where we examine the intersection between solution-focused brief therapy and current topics going on in the world. And we do this because we genuinely want the world to be a better place. So enjoy and come examine the details with us. What people listening to this podcast don't know, that this is like the 6th attempt to do this recording because there is road work happening literally outside my front door. So I can hear construction and trucks beeping as they back up. And my street's not that long, but it feels like they just back up unendingly, as if my road is 10,000 miles long. And it's like they just back up and there's no going forward. You know, it's just a constant beep. So anyway, I think I got it sorted. I'm in a place in my house where I don't think I can hear it because I want to talk about something really, really important today. And I don't want to be interrupted or distracted. Now, the important thing I want to talk about is this past week, I got the opportunity to hang out with you and your wonderful family. And every time I do, I always notice something that stands out to me that I think is really, really kind of remarkable. And I think it's a key idea in life that you and your family have mastered, I think, but I don't think many people have. So let me talk about it. I'm going to break this down and then listen to what your ideas are, how this works. So the idea I'm talking about specifically is what I will refer to as agency. But what I'm talking about is like the impact and power of giving people freedom, choice, and independence. So for example, Adam's middle son, Toby. So I bought Toby a really cool toy when I was there. I bought him an exact life-size replica of Stormbreaker. Now, those of you listening who don't know what Stormbreaker is Thor's axe. So Thor had a hammer, and then in one of the Thor movies, after the hammer was destroyed, he got an axe, and that axe is called Stormbreaker. And I went to a toy store and I bought Toby a life-size replica of Stormbreaker. Like, this thing is huge, massive, heavy, and makes a ton of noise. So of course, Toby, being 13 years old and super energetic, he's swinging this axe about 3 inches away from his sister's head. Now, the childhood that I grew up in, if swing a life-size replica axe at your sibling's head, my parents would be very directive, and in my specific case, even abusive, really. But most of the time, a parent would be very directive. Like, Toby, go put that down. And if you don't put that down, you're going to get this punishment. Or, Toby, put that down. I'm taking it away from you, and you can't have it back until I say so. Those types of things are the way most parents handle things. And Adam doesn't do that. Adam says things like, Toby, is that a wise choice with that axe? And then Toby will say no. And Adam will say, so what should you choose? And Toby will say, I'll do better, or whatever. Like, you know, obviously I make this like a hypothetical thing. But at no point does Adam take away Toby's ability to have agency. Like, in all of my years of knowing you, Adam, and all of my years of watching you parent, I've never seen you say, like, I'm taking your cell phone, you can have it back when I say so. Or, I'm taking your thing and you can have it back when I say so. And I think about that, and I think about the work that we do as solution-focused therapists and the impact we try to have on the families and people that we meet with. I think oftentimes, like, the goal of therapy, like, the goal behind the goal, is to help people have agency over their lives. And if you're paying attention to the news these days, there's a celebrity situation going on that relates directly to agency with Britney Spears, who's trying to get control back over her financial and professional life. And she gave a speech in court about the impact of having those things taken from her. And it just reminded me of the importance of agency and how amazing it is to watch you parent as if agency is important and watch your children respond in a way that honors their agency. And it has me thinking, like, how do we help more people achieve high levels of agency and then make choices that fit with wanting to have that level of agency?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I have to do is clarify and say, you said not many people have figured it out, but I have. And I'm not sure that that's entirely true. I think that we strive to maximize agency, but I'm definitely not perfect at it. But I do think that valuing agency has been kind of a hallmark of the way that my wife and I have chosen to parent. There was an influential person in my wife's life who was somebody that she considered a really great mother. And this person said to her, I have learned that there are plenty of times where I have to say no as a parent, but I do everything I can whenever possible to say yes, so that when the answer has to be no, they understand that I'm saying no for a reason, not just out of convenience. And I think that that kind of a stance, that saying yes whenever possible, that's a stance that helps to maximize agency. That we have to remember that kids, they're trying to figure out how to make choice. And it's our job as parents to help them to learn to thoughtfully make choice, to willingly accept the consequences of choice, and to be accountable for the choices that they make. I think in some sense, our job as solution focused practitioners is also to maximize agency. That one of the things that I think is really valuable is that in solution focused brief therapy, we say all the time the client is the expert. And I would probably amend that a little bit. And I would say the client is an expert. I, as the practitioner, have some expertise in this kind of conversation, in developing hopefully what's a therapeutic conversation, but I rely really, really heavily on the expertise of my client and their knowledge and understanding of their life and their choices and their abilities. And so I do my job best when I allow them to maximize their expertise by not making suggestions, by not telling them what I think they should do, by not even intimating that I think one direction is better than another direction. And so I think agency is kind of one of the hallmarks of parenting, but it is also very much something that we absolutely have to honor when we do the work in solution focused brief therapy, or we have overstepped our role and the bounds within which we should be working.
So, and I want to be clear, I'm not saying you do it perfectly, but I am saying understanding that agency is important is the win. You know what I mean? So, like, how did that happen?
I mean, to be very fair, the way that I was raised, I had a lot of agency. I had a lot of freedom. But my parents would also kind of look down the road for me and help me to understand that I needed to look down the road. So they would say, you absolutely can choose that. But if you choose that, this is a possible outcome. Do you want that outcome? And so my parents helped me to kind of look forward and make choices based on what I wanted the outcome to be. And I think that we do that as solution focused brief therapists, not so much as saying this is a possible outcome, but by focusing on the outcome. We begin the session by saying, what are your best hopes? And then every question after that is connected to the desired outcome. And I think that having that focus on desired outcome, in essence, says, if that's what you want, and then we spend so much time describing the presence of that, in essence, we're saying, if you made choices that were consistent with that outcome, what would some of those choices be? And what would the signs be that you were making those choices? And so I think inherently, when we focus on outcomes, we maximize agency. I think a second thing that helped us to parent in that way is that that's something that I valued, but I also am partnered with somebody who also values that. And so being on the same page and having overt conversations about how we wanted to parent, that played a big role. And I think in some sense, again, in a solution focused setting, we're asking people to evaluate, even with that very beginning question, what do you want? What's the desired outcome? We're really asking them to evaluate, what are your values? What are your beliefs? What are the core principles by which you live your life? If you lived those things perfectly or as close to perfect as possible, what outcome are you hoping for? And so I think in some sense, we have to remember as solution focused practitioners that we're really trying to get to the core of our clients. We have to figure out what's the most important thing or things in their lives. And then we link those important things to a desired outcome. And when we link those core values to a desired outcome, we're really saying now you're choosing to move toward this desired outcome because it's meaningful to you. And when somebody's moving towards something because it's meaningful to them, there's no coercion that's necessary. There's no force that's necessary. There's no limiting of agency that's necessary because they know where they're going, but they also know the why for which they're moving in that direction. And so I think partnering with somebody who values what I value allows us to stay consistent with that. And then I guess the third thing that I would say is we just have learned over time that that's an easier way to parent, that we fight less, that there's less contention in our home, that our children are happier because they get to do things they choose to do more often. So we've just learned that in some sense, if we can maximize agency, we're a happier family.
So let me tell you why I think agency is so important. And it's not like, when I go hang out at the Frower's house, I'm just like, oh, now I know. You know what I mean? But what I am trying to say, and I think this is a lesson that all people interested in solution focused brief therapy, I want them to learn, but also anybody interested in happiness, anybody interested in having a life that is fulfilled with positive things. If there's one lesson I've learned from being a psychotherapist practicing solution focused brief therapy for 15 years, it's that when people have agency, they tend to make good choices for themselves. But life tends to remove our agency. Like, for example, I did a session with a woman who lost her agency to an addiction. In essence, I'm now following the addiction. In this case, it was cigarettes, as opposed to making choices in my life. So, like, I wake up and I obey the addiction. The addiction tells me to have a cigarette. So I obey the addiction instead of making choices. When the therapy like returned her agency, and I basically asked her, when were you the version of you that was making different choices? And she said, when I was 5 or 6. That's when I had the most freedom and control. So the obvious question is, if you woke up tomorrow and you're still your same age, but that like 5 or 6 year old within you is back in charge, what would you notice? And she basically said, I would be making different choices. And she outlined some of those different choices. I would be laughing, smiling, playing, eating healthier. And what she left out is she never said I would choose to smoke cigarettes. When I saw her 2 weeks later, she had essentially quit smoking. She went from 2 packs of cigarettes a day to 2 cigarettes a day, just like that. And I wish I could tell you that that's like weird, unique, or rare. But the truth is, when people have free choice, they much more make choices that are right for them. So for me, one of the jobs of any of all of us, whether we're talking about working with clients or as you were just talking about, if we're talking about parenting or anything else, it's making sure that our loved ones around us and the people that we care about experience agency and free choice, because that's when people make the best decisions for themselves.
You linked a couple of things that I think are important. You linked agency to happiness. And I think that that is an essential link, that when we maximize agency, we also maximize the potential for happiness. You think about, like athletes who practice and practice and practice and who push and then ultimately become triumphant. There's a different level of satisfaction if it's something that they've chosen to do, if it's something that they've pursued because it's their own passion versus somebody like a parent pushing them to do something that they don't want to do. And so you could have the same level of a success, but if you don't choose it, it means less. Your happiness is diminished. Whereas if you choose it, then the level of happiness is maximized. So I think that's one really important connection, that agency is connected to happiness. And I think the other component that's linked there is that agency is connected to learning or progress, right? Of improvement. Again, when I choose to do something, then when I fail at it, now I have the motivation or the desire to like pick myself back up, to try again, to be innovative and try something different in order to achieve that, because it's something that I'm choosing to do. And so I get better at things because I have the freedom to choose to make that action. And so I think, again, as you think about kind of principles that are important in solution focused brief therapy, most people who go through solution focused therapy, when you say, what was the most helpful thing, or what's the benefit you got out of this? Most often people say, I'm happy. I feel better. And it's not lost on me that happiness is connected to, because the therapist never overstepped their bounds and tried to force you to do something or make you move in a direction you didn't want to move. You freely got to choose each step of that process. And so, therefore, it makes a lot of sense that happiness would be maximized. But in addition, people come to therapy because they want to change. And the way for us to maximize the likelihood of change in the direction they want is to allow them to choose to make that change. And so I think when we think about the therapeutic process, people really want to change and they want to be happy. And the most likely path to both of those things is to maximize their agency.
And I think I'm going to end by saying this. I completely agree. I think you cannot separate agency slash freedom with happiness. Just look at the impact that people experience when they have their freedom removed, and look throughout history at the great lengths people are willing to go to reacquire their freedom. That says everything you need to know about the power of agency and freedom. Now, we can have our agency and freedom removed by doing criminal acts and going to prison, or having a criminal act done upon you and being kidnapped, or whatever. And just look at the unbelievable extremes people are willing to go to have their freedom restored. But if you think about it, psychotherapy really isn't about problem solving. It's about agency restoration, because oftentimes we've had our freedom removed by a mental health diagnosis, by an addiction, by a past trauma. And I think psychotherapy is about restoring that agency so that you can be your best self. And in order to use this approach, and in fact, in order to be the best human you can be, I think you have to know the lesson. You have to know that when people are given agency, they make good choices for themselves. So if someone is making bad choices for themselves, instead of trying to figure out what's wrong with them, we should try to figure out what's trapping them. We should try to figure out what's limiting them. We should try to figure out what is removing their agency. And then once you help that agency become restored, that person is significantly more likely to start doing things that are in their best interest and that are right for them.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think that's such a shift in perspective for clinicians. Oftentimes we place blame on the individual to say, what are you doing in order to be in the place that you're being? And I think if we shifted our perspective to say, where is the limiting factor within agency? we very quickly understand if we can restore agency, we're going to see marked improvement. And I think oftentimes that restoration of agency is simply a shift in perspective. Once we understand what we really value and what we would choose on our own, then we can move toward that quickly. I think you're 100% correct.
Well, look, Adam, once again, this podcast was brought to you by the Solution Focused Universe, which is the largest online training community dedicated to the solution focused approach and the growth of professionals interested in mastering the solution focused approach, and brought to you by Solution Focused Notes, which is the only online electronic health record system dedicated to solution focused professionals, where they can find templates to use treatment plans, progress notes, intake forms, everything you need to run a practice electronically, calendar, your charting system, and all of it tailored to the needs of solution-focused professionals. I want to thank those two organizations. Adam, I want to thank you, and I hope all of you guys listening learned a whole lot about the importance of agency, and you learn to believe in people so that if they have their agency restored, they're so much more likely to be their best selves.